19-year-old Ella Mae Smith pedaled her bicycle down the quiet country road with purpose. It was 6:30 p.m., and Ella Mae had been dispatched by her mother to track down the four Smith children who had failed to come back home in time for supper. Ella Mae knew exactly where the kids would be. 16-year-old Barbara, 12-year-old Gladys, and 2-year-old Janet had left the house together earlier in the day to pick wildflowers near an abandoned gravel pit that everyone called Sugar Island. Their brother, 14-year-old Stanley Smith, was also expected to be in the area. He had gone there with Oliver Turpening, a boy from a neighboring farm, and their big plan for the day was shooting crows with Turpening's .22 caliber rifle. Upon arriving at Sugar Island, Ella Mae left her bicycle behind and walked into the wooded glen where she expected to find her brother and three sisters. It was eerily quiet. She walked farther into the shadowy woods, calling her sisters' names. Ella Mae's calls were met with silence, and then she spotted something in a patch of tall grass. It looked like her sister Barbara. Ella Mae couldn't quite tell, but it looked like Barbara was lying down, like she was hiding. Ella Mae thought her sister was playing some sort of game with the other children, but back at the house, the family was waiting and the big sister wasn't in the mood to play along. Ella Mae ran toward Barbara, hoping to round up all four children quickly and head back home. And before she knew it, Ella Mae Smith was looking down at her sister's lifeless body, wildflowers still clutched in her hands, her head resting in a pool of blood. A rush of terror gripped Ella Mae. Suddenly frantic, not knowing what to do, she turned to run back to her bicycle. But before Ella Mae took a single step, she discovered the bodies of Gladys and Janet just a few feet away. My name is Michael, and this is the story of a mass murder that took place nearly 80 years ago, but it still haunts Imlay City, Michigan to this very day. Also, I will be sharing the killer's own chilling account of what happened on that spring day in 1947. The full newspaper article from my thumbnail is available at grimsilence.com, and if you're interested in true crime that tends to be older and more obscure, please be sure to like and subscribe. Also, if you could leave a comment below, that would really help me grow this channel. The year was 1947. Jackie Robinson was making baseball history, the U.S. government was hunting for communists in Hollywood, and a new film called Miracle on 34th Street was receiving rave reviews. And about an hour's drive north of Detroit, Michigan, the small farming community of Imlay City became the site of a quadruple murder that made international headlines. At the center of it all was 16-year-old Oliver Turpening Jr., a boy who had once earned himself a brand new Bible as a reward for perfect Sunday school attendance. Unfortunately, Sunday school was where Turpening peaked, and after that, it was all downhill. His own father described him to reporters as a problem child. At the age of 13, Turpening shot his stepmother's dog, and later on, he would admit to wanting to kill his stepmother as well. By the age of 15, Turpening had run away from home 3 times, once making it as far as Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His father sent him $25 with the ultimatum to, quote, "come home and behave yourself or stay there." Without a single penny to his name, the teenager sheepishly returned home, but on the condition that he be allowed to quit school, which his father agreed to. Despite his decision to become a high school dropout, an IQ test would later confirm that Oliver Turpening was no dummy. His IQ was determined to be 112, so while he wasn't exactly a genius, most experts agree that a score of 112 indicates above average intelligence. Turpening was perfectly capable of excelling in school if he had wanted to. But he wasn't good at making friends, and the quiet, seemingly meek teenager felt that he just didn't belong. Oliver Turpening did, however, have one good friend, a boy whom newspapers referred to as his best pal, and that was 14-year-old Stanley Smith, whose family had a dairy farm just down the road from the Turpening farm. Oliver Turpening and Stanley Smith were said to go everywhere together, and along the way, Turpening got to know one of Smith's older sisters, 16-year-old Barbara. It was widely known that he had a crush on the girl, and he very weirdly considered Barbara his girlfriend, although, according to others, she most certainly was not. Newspapers referred to Barbara Smith as Turpening's girlfriend, two words in quotes, suggesting that even the papers didn't believe they were a couple. Turpening had asked Barbara out numerous times, but she politely refused his advances. The two had once shared a kiss, but it was during an old-timey kissing game called Post Office, which could be compared to Spin the Bottle. Barbara had kissed Oliver Turpening because those were the rules of the game, but Turpening likely saw it as more than that. For Oliver Turpening, basking in the graceful beauty of Barbara Smith was a nice perk of being best pals with her brother Stanley, and Turpening's intense interest in the girl would make for some interesting headlines later on. On the afternoon of May 26, 1947, Oliver Turpening had joined the Smith children at their home for lunch. He arrived at the house with his father's .22 caliber rifle, which wasn't all that unusual. He and Stanley enjoyed taking pot shots at critters out in the countryside, and Turpening came prepared. After lunch, Barbara left the house with her younger sisters Gladys and Janet. Little Janet was about a week shy of turning 3. It was a chilly spring day, colder than it should have been at the end of May, but the sun was shining and it was still a fine day for picking wildflowers at Sugar Island. Stanley and the Turpening boys soon made their way to Sugar Island as well. The girls happily skipped through the brush in a wooded area near the gravel pit. Oliver Turpening took turns with Stanley as they fired the rifle at this and that. The sound of an occasional gunshot didn't seem to bother the girls one bit. To them, it was just the sound of their dumb brother and his weird friend having their fun. And then, perhaps out of boredom, Oliver Turpening's thoughts drifted back to one day the previous fall when he had gone pheasant hunting. And for some inexplicable reason, that fall day was when Oliver Turpening began thinking about shooting people instead. What happened next at Sugar Island was reported by newspapers across America, with headlines even making front-page news as far away as Australia. The accounts of what happened mostly matched up, but some key details were reported differently from paper to paper. It's hard to know exactly which account is the most accurate, so it seems appropriate to let Oliver Turpening himself tell this part of the story. In 1972, 25 years after Turpening did the unthinkable, the Detroit Free Press published a lengthy account of the incident as told by Turpening to a journalist. It's interesting to note that in Turpening's retelling, the names of the victims had been changed. The newspaper gave no explanation of why, so it seems likely that Turpening couldn't bring himself to say their real names even after so many years had passed. In this retelling, I will replace Turpening's fictional names with the victims' real names. The killer's description of the mass murder is as follows. I see the early summer day, the woods, Stanley and me lying on a bank of the gravel pit, the girls skipping along gaily picking wildflowers, the .22 caliber rifle cradled in my lap, the girls stopping to tell us they are on their way home. My thought as I watched them prance away, what would it be like to kill someone? Stanley laying across from me, head propped up on his elbow, watching the girls disappear into the heavy foliage of the woods. Me, staring at Stanley. My second thought, get up and do it. Right then, my nightmare unfolds, and the sordid climax begins. Rifle gripped in my right hand, I uncoil from the ground and step over Stanley's outstretched legs. He doesn't move or seem to notice me. But then he really has no time. I take one step, pivot, the .22 arches to my hip and cracks. Instantly, his shoulders slump. His elbow collapses, and his head topples to the ground, face down. Like a hunter easing up to the body of a man-eating lion, I am standing vigilantly over Stanley's body, rifle reloaded, aimed, ready for instant use. The scene is like a still life painting, the branches and leaves of the trees, the undulating wildflowers, the ripples rolling across the water in the gravel pit. Everything is frozen, inanimate, yet so visually real. Without thought or feeling, I am part of that picture, but only for a moment. Starting down the path the girls had taken, I am walking away from Stanley. Why? I don't know. The lack of sound and movement coming from his body, I suppose, suggests that my 14-year-old friend is dead, but I don't know. Everything around me is flat, without dimension. I cover 100 yards before breaking stride. Do I kill the girls, I think? Instantly, I am moving faster to close the distance between me and the laughter coming from several yards up the path. Strange. The foliage seems to break open wide, and there they are. The girls have heard me, for each in turn glances over her shoulder. I stop 6 feet away, and again, the .22 arches to my hip, cracks, and Gladys, trailing at the end of the line, drops straight down, her 12-year-old body made lifeless by the lethal dot appearing on the back of her head. Barbara and Janet spin around and face me. Barbara, 16 years old, my age, fully understands what has happened. Eyes wide, cheeks drawn tight, lips fluttering, her face is a mask of awesome fear. She is screaming over and over again. "Oliver! Oliver!" repeated several times. I am standing listlessly in front of both girls, 7 or 8 feet away, rifle pointed at Janet, tottering alongside her hysterical sister and staring at the crumpled form lying at my feet. 3 years old, Janet doesn't grasp what is happening. She is whimpering, the tiny tearlets rolling down her dimpled cheeks. I am not thinking. I can't. Barbara's piercing scream is raging in my mind. My finger won't close on the half-squeezed trigger. Something, not a conscious thought, has stopped me. I can't shoot Janet while Barbara is alive. I whip the rifle to my left, and an ugly wound erupts between her eyes. As Barbara is sinking to the ground, I am swinging the rifle back on Janet. There are moans, low, muffled, permeating tones that seem to grow and grow until they bellow like 1,000 drums beating in my mind. Barbara is not dead. The .22 in my hand cracks again and again and again and again. The moan stops. All is silent. Once more, I am momentarily cast in a still life picture, bodies strewn before me. I am standing in the foreground, an inanimate object without thought or feeling. After gunning down his best friend and 3 of his sisters at Sugar Island, Oliver Turpening walked home as he contemplated whether or not he should kill his stepmother, an idea that he had been kicking around for some time. He decided against it. Instead, the 16-year-old sat down to dinner with his family as if it was just another Monday. They had ham and mashed potatoes that night. After dinner, Turpening told his father that he needed to drive over to the home of Raymond Lindkey to pick up a pair of galoshes, or as he called them, his rubbers. Turpening left the house, and as it turned out, he would never set foot in that house again. As the teenager pulled out to the road in his father's 1934 Ford, he saw neighbor Joe Kohler mowing his yard. "Don't work too hard," Turpening casually called out from the car, as if to convince Kohler, or perhaps himself, that everything was just fine and dandy. Turpening did stop at the Lindkey home to get his rubbers, but instead of heading back home, he made his way east. His destination was the city of Port Huron, Michigan, 40 minutes away, which sat right on the U.S.-Canada border. This was apparently Oliver Turpening's big getaway plan. He had just taken the lives of 4 innocent children, one of them allegedly his best friend, and now he needed to skip town. Probably around the time that Oliver Turpening was arriving in Port Huron, Ella Mae Smith was sobbing as she pounded on the door of the Turpening house. She screamed at Turpening's father, Oliver Turpening Sr., to call the sheriff. Upon hearing what had happened, the elder Turpening felt a sickness in the pit of his stomach. Ella Mae seemed like she knew who had killed her brother and 3 sisters, and Mr. Turpening was fairly certain as well. Word spread quickly around town that night, and in the 1940s, it wasn't unusual for local citizens to turn to mob justice when it came to violent criminals in their own community. Rather than wait for the police to methodically investigate the crime, a band of farmers armed themselves with rifles and shotguns and set out to find the young killer. They searched well into the night, but Oliver Turpening Jr. was long gone. In Port Huron, Turpening's apparent plan to flee to Canada unraveled immediately. Not only was the car just about out of gas, Turpening didn't even have 10 cents to pay the toll on the Blue Water Bridge and get across the border into Canada. And so Turpening abandoned the car. By the next morning, he had managed to hitchhike as far south as Erie, Michigan, just minutes away from the Michigan-Ohio state line and the city of Toledo, Ohio. If Turpening couldn't leave the country, he supposed that leaving the state was the next best thing. By the time Turpening reached Erie, radio stations all over the region were abuzz with the news of the 4 murder victims in Imlay City. And this is where Turpening's story takes a critical turn. The family of Norman Dombrowski lived on the outskirts of Erie, Michigan. They had been listening to the radio and were aware of all of the sordid details of the murders. News reports also gave a detailed description of the suspected killer, Oliver Turpening. Mrs. Dombrowski lamented the poor children who had been killed, and then she decided that she needed a loaf of bread. The Dombrowski's 15-year-old son, Norman Jr., ran to the Superior Oil Station, a nearby gas station and grocery. He returned with the bread a few minutes later, and he also had quite a story for his mother and father. "Hey, Ma," he said excitedly, "that kid the cops all over are looking for? He's standing right down there at the Superior gas station trying to thumb a ride." Mrs. Dombrowski rolled her eyes and instantly dismissed her son's wild claim. Then Norman Sr. came in from feeding the chickens outside. Norman Jr. told his father, "Hey, Pa, that kid down at the Superior gas station thumbing for a ride? He looks just like that kid they want for killing those kids up at Imlay City. Why don't you go grab him?" Norman Dombrowski Sr. was headed out anyway to a carpentry shop, so he figured he might as well take a look. And just like his son had reported, there was indeed a hitchhiking teenager who fit the description from news reports. Dombrowski stopped and offered Oliver Turpening a ride. Turpening hadn't been able to sleep after his mass murder, and he was exhausted. He gladly accepted Dombrowski's invitation. Some news reports stated that Turpening admitted to Dombrowski that he was wanted for murder. Others indicated that Dombrowski became suspicious when he realized that Turpening was lying about being from Toledo, a place Dombrowski knew well. Either way, Norman Dombrowski Sr. drove to the office of a local judge and told Turpening to wait for a moment. The boy was in police custody minutes later. When questioned about the murders, Oliver Turpening confessed immediately, saying, "I don't know. I just don't know why I did it." With some coaxing from police, he elaborated a bit. Turpening talked about his pheasant hunting trip from the previous year. He told officers, quote, "I wondered then what it would feel like to put a bullet through a human, like I was putting bullets through those birds." As Turpening described the killings to State Police Commander Don Leonard, he spoke calmly and politely, recounting the events at Sugar Island without emotion. He seemed surprisingly at ease for a teenager who had committed 4 murders only 2 days earlier. Turpening explained that after killing Stanley Smith, quote, "I thought I'd better kill them too," meaning the 3 sisters, so they couldn't tell anyone I had killed Stanley. He added that he killed 2-year-old Janet because she was old enough to walk and talk. Turpening maintained his composure while talking to police officers until he was asked if he would like to attend the children's funeral. The young murderer broke down in tears, burying his head in his hands, and he said, "No, I never want to see them again. I would be afraid to face their family." At some point during the police interview, Turpening gave the closest thing to an explanation that he would ever reveal. On why he killed Stanley Smith, he said, "I've always kind of wondered what it would be like to kill somebody." And then he lamented that he didn't get the thrill he expected from it. The Lapeer County prosecutor at the time was Kenneth Smith, no relation to the victims. He wasn't buying Turpening's "I kinda wondered" explanation. The prosecutor believed that Turpening had been in the act of R-wording Barbara Smith and was then discovered in the act by the other children. This suspicion was raised because In addition to Oliver Turpenning's known fixation on Barbara Smith, Barbara's lifeless body was found with her pants pulled down. Turpenning flatly denied assaulting her, and an examination of her body backed up that claim. No evidence of SA was found on Barbara Smith's body. During a 1990 interview with the Flint Journal, Turpenning stated that he pulled her pants down only to look at her. While authorities moved toward getting Turpenning in front of a judge and possibly a jury, the town of Imlay City gathered for a tearful farewell to the 4 Smith children. The funeral home in town had never needed more than one hearse before, so 3 additional vehicles were borrowed from neighboring towns. 1,000 people, about half the town's population, crowded the funeral home and the surrounding area. The funeral procession to the Imlay Township Cemetery consisted of 100 cars. In all, about 2,000 were in attendance at the burial. Many were the victims' classmates. Pallbearers solemnly carried 4 white caskets to the common grave that the children would share. The caskets were laid side by side, and mourners covered them with red roses and white lilies. William Smith, father of Barbara, Stanley, Gladys, and Janet, said he had no hatred for the young killer, and he held no grudge against the Turpenning family. Smith told Oliver Turpenning Sr., "I am sure your boy is insane." Strange as it might seem, this was a statement of empathy and forgiveness. A psychological examination concluded that Oliver Turpenning Jr. was in fact not insane. The 16-year-old stood before a judge in a packed courtroom and pleaded guilty. So the killer was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Over the years, various appeals were filed on Turpenning's behalf, but all were denied. Oliver Turpenning Jr., the 16-year-old who ended 4 promising young lives on a whim, went on to spend the next 63 years behind bars. He died in 2010, just 3 days short of his 80th birthday. Condolences to the Smith family and everyone in Imlay City who remembers. I think crimes like this should serve as a reminder of why children should not have guns, even teenagers. And I feel like that shouldn't be a controversial statement, but I'm sure there will be a lot of people who disagree with me. Please leave your comments below, hit the like button, and thank you for watching.